All right, Shabbat Shalom, everyone. So I want to begin with a little turn and talk. This is a time for us to share some experiences. I want you to think back to a time when you felt strange. In other words, when you came into a situation when you were a stranger. And I want you to share just a little bit about where that was and what it felt like. So we'll turn to the people around us real quick, 30 seconds each. Go. Wow. Who can, I don't know what rabbi would say no cookies, all right? So it was very interesting because all the instances were going into Jewish places, which I found that interesting. I don't know if probably other people had different experiences, but we're gonna hold on to them. Could have been going to a new school. Could have been a lot of different things. But before I quote the Torah about what the Torah has to say about being strange or feeling strange, I felt it appropriate to quote the musical artist Jim Morrison, of blessed memory. And in early 1967, he was going through this bout of depression. And from that, he wrote these words, "People are strange," which turned into the song, which is, "People are strange when you're a stranger. I feel like I should do it to the lyrics, right? People are strange when you're a stranger. Faces look ugly when you're alone. Women seem wicked when you're unwanted. Streets are uneven when you're down. When you're strange, faces come out of the rain. When you're strange, no one remembers your name. When you're strange, when you're strange." All right, we're going to end it there. All right. So, it was all right. I didn't give my best Jim Morrison. This is not karaoke. This is a sermon. All right.
You didn't have the hair.
I know. I should have put the wig on, everything. But if you know what it's like to be a stranger, you know what Morrison meant. The world looks different when you feel like you don't belong. But more importantly, you are alone and alienated from others around you. That feeling that Morrison describes of being on the outside looking in is exactly the experience that the Torah names when it talks about the ger, the stranger. And this week's Parsha on Akev doesn't just acknowledge that feeling, but it commands us on how to respond to it. I want to read you, this is a short part from chapter 10. "And now, O Israel, what does the Lord your God demand of you? Only this, to revere the Lord your God, to walk only in God's paths, to love God, to serve the Lord your God with all your heart and your soul, keeping the Lord's commandments and laws, which I enjoin upon you today for your good. Mark the heavens to their uttermost reaches belong to the Lord your God, the earth and all that is on it. Yet it was your fathers that the Lord was drawn in his love for them, so that God chose you, their lineal descendants, from amongst all the peoples, as is now the case. Cut away, therefore, the thickening about your hearts, and stiffen your necks no more. For the Lord your God is supreme, and the Lord is supreme, the great, the mighty, and awesome God, who shows no favor and takes no bribe." Now here's the interesting part. "Oseh mishpat yatom v'almana ve'ohev ger, latet lo lechem v'simla." But uphold the cause of the fatherless, the widow, and befriend or love the stranger, providing the stranger with food and clothing. "Ve'ahavtem et hager ki gerim hayitem be'eretz Mitzrayim." For you too, you must love the stranger, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. Now I thought about this, why now? Why this message now and why this ending? I imagine it was a pep talk for the Israelites. You're ready. God is with you. You have nothing to fear. You have all the knowledge. Now it's your turn. Take the next steps. But along with that power and might, we read, don't forget the stranger. And the mitzvah occurs, anyone know how many times it occurs in the Torah? 36. 36 times in the Torah, more so than any other commandment. When you're in the land, don't forget the stranger. And not only don't forget them, but you have to love them. Because you too were a stranger in the land of Egypt. Why does God remind them of this? Their parents were just slaves. It's kind of a hard thing to forget 400 years of slavery in one generation. Now, Rashi comments that the stranger is mentioned here because you have this previous mention of God's power, and now we want to learn about God's humility. That life is not just all about power, but it's also about protection. Rashi also tells us how we do this, which means to give the stranger bread and clothing. And what is this bread and clothing a reminder of? It's a reminder of when Jacob is fleeing his brother, Esau, when he was just a little kid. And he goes to Bethel, Luz, which is what this ark is, the story is named after. And he asks what does he ask God for? Lechem le'echol ubeged lilbosh. Bread to eat and clothes to wear. And it's meant to remind us of Jacob, our namesake. Remember what it was like before we were a nation, before we were in the wilderness, even before slavery, when we were just one person. And everything was on that one person who was a stranger. And he was vulnerable. And with vulnerability comes humility. And this is another message of this week's Parshat Eikev. In chapter 8, Moses warns the Israelites, when you enter the land, eat your fill, build houses, see your flocks multiply. Be careful. And you may say in your heart, my power and the strength of my hands made me this wealth. But you shall remember the Lord your God, for it is he who gives you the strength to prosper. The Torah challenges the myth of the self-made person. No one builds society alone. We are shaped by the people who feed us, who teach us, who welcome us, who believe in us, and who work in our fields and our homes. And God's vision is that we live as a society, not as isolated individuals. And when we combine these ideas together, we see what God really wants. That no one should feel alone in the land. And what leads to loneliness is not just when no one talks to you, but when they act hateful towards you. The stranger or loner today can take on many identities. But one of them is the lonely person. In Vivek Murthy's book, Together, he is the former U.S. Surgeon General. He tells a story in his own life that was formative for him. It was in middle school, and he spent what felt like 8 interminable weeks in woodshop class, sitting near 2 boys who called him Gandhi, and not in an admiring way, and mocked him for his Indian heritage, because he had dark skin. And it made him dread going to class every day. One boy was the obvious ringleader, bigger, stronger, more confident. And then he had a sidekick who was diminutive. He had an injured air about him, and he had few, if any, friends. Now, looking back, Murthy realized something that he couldn't see at the time. He said, I suspect the smaller boy's loneliness played a role. His acceptance by the bully was contingent on his joining in on the bullying. If he refused, he'd be rejected and become an object of derision himself, he writes. And it wasn't just their loneliness. Murthy writes, my own loneliness doubtless also played a role. Bullies target lonely kids who are less likely to have defenders. And being bullied makes kids fear more fearful, withdrawn, and lonelier. It's a heartbreaking cycle. Isolation fuels cruelty, and cruelty deepens isolation, a cycle that leaves no one whole, he writes. Simply put, hurt people hurt people. Loneliness, the feeling one gets when they are strangers, can have a lasting impact, not just on individuals, but on societies. God wanted Bnei Israel to build a different society, a model society. In other lands, if you were a stranger, you're on your own. It meant you didn't own land. And with no land and no one helping you, you'd eventually be starved out. But not in Israel. In Israel, the heart was at the center of society. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs once wrote, Judaism was the first religion in history to place love at the heart of the spiritual life. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your might. Love your neighbor. Love the stranger. And what we love most, because this is where God is to be found, in life itself. That is our greatest strength. It enabled our ancestors to survive every persecution. It helped Holocaust survivors to survive. It gave the Jewish people the courage to rebuild the land and the state of Israel. And that's why our greatest prayer on the high holidays is, write us in the book of life. We don't ask for wealth or fame, stardom or success. We don't pray to be spared trials and tribulations. We just ask for life. That is what Judaism is, a life of love and a love of life. All the rest, he writes, is commentary. Ahavah, love in Judaism, as I spoke about last week, is a verb. The more we act in loving ways, the more loving the societies we build will become. When we were the minority in countries, we still had a commandment to feed the non-Jewish poor along with the Jewish poor, and the explanation was, mipnei darchei shalom, for the sake of the ways of peace. Now, I used to think that was just a way for a rabbi saying, don't get us into trouble. Feed the non-Jewish poor, or else we're going to be slaughtered. But I now believe that it's something different. Because we have that word shleimut, shalom, being whole. It was about our wholeness, our morality. How do we become more whole as human beings, as Jews? Now, the stranger has evolved over the years. In the ancient days, the ger, the stranger, were non-Israelites who lived among the people. In medieval times and Talmudic times, they became converts. And today, in Jewish America, the stranger is often the immigrant among us. Because we too were immigrants. We too were strangers. Jim Morrison said, when you're strange, no one remembers your name. The Torah, in contrast, commands us to remember our own strangeness in Egypt, to remember the humanity of the one who's on the outside, and to remember that no community or society is whole when people are left unseen. God links greatness with divine humility. The creator of heaven and earth bends down to care for the orphan, the widow, and the stranger. And we are called to do the same, to walk in God's ways. It's not just about charity, it's about reshaping the culture so that no one is invisible. And I look to no other place and how to do that than in a place like Sha'arei Kodesh. It's a place where we can build that culture. There are few places in society where strangers can come in and be welcomed with open arms. The irony of it is that a lot of the times people felt strange, they went to other shuls. Sometimes you can be an everyday minyan goer and be in a strange place because of something you went through, like a death in the family. Speaking from personal experience, joining those minyanim felt very strange. Even though I knew the words, I knew how to say them, but it was like living in a dream. In every part of society, they would tell me, we don't need sadness, take it outside. You look disheveled, go back, go home and shave. But in a minyan, I was embraced for who I was, as have countless of other Jews in their time of need as part of a minyan for thousands of years. Today, the ger, the stranger, might be an immigrant, might be a convert, might be a newcomer to town, or the person sitting quietly by themselves at Kiddush. Whoever they are, the mitzvah is the same, to love them, to bring them in, to make them feel shleimut, wholeness, the wholeness of community. And that's how we move from mere survival to a love of life and a life of love. That's how we transform Morrison's lament into a promise. When you're here, you're never a stranger. Wishing you all a Shabbat Shalom.